succession planning is a growing concern for Canadian business as the population ages into retirement. Who's taking over? Many businesses are just opting to close. How big a problem is this? And what can we do to mitigate this? I'm joined by Dr. Sarah Burrows. She's the assistant professor at Queen's University to talk about this. Dr. Burrows, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Now, you're at the Smith School of Business at Queen's?
I am.
Tell us a little bit about the Smith School of Business.
So Smith School of Business at Queen's University is one of the country's leading business schools. We actually launched the very first undergraduate business program all the way back in 1919. And since then, we've experienced tremendous growth and now offer a variety of programs, including MBA degrees and PhD degrees.
Amazing. And you're an assistant professor at the school?
I am.
Very cool. Thank you so much for joining me today to talk about succession planning. Now, a recent study by MMP talks about the silver tsunami, very scary words, in Canadian business where owners are retiring without proper succession planning. Those businesses are simply just closing. Now, first of all, is this something you're seeing?
Yes. The short response to that is yes, definitely. And so that MNP report talks about how 2/3 of business owners don't have a formal succession plan in place, and that about within the majority of which are planning to retire the next 5 to 10 years. And so this trend is also more concerning for certain sectors like agriculture, which once again, the majority are family owned and many of which do not have these formal succession plans in place. The other thing that I do want to highlight with regards to the silver tsunami, in many ways, this was actually compounded by in 2023, the federal government changed our tax exemption laws. And so essentially what happened was this change limited the ability for business owners to claim lifetime capital gains during family succession. And so this really great 2023 KPMG survey of family-owned businesses showed how this additional pressure led many business owners to rush into succession before this took effect in 2024. And several of the business owners admitted to rushing into succession, even though they believed that next generation wasn't fully prepared yet. Going back to that MNP report that you referenced, as of today, in 2025, the average age of a Canadian business owner is 58 years old. And again, many of those do not have succession plans in place. And so I think for small business owners, the key here is to start early. And in the case of family-owned businesses, of course, that predecessor often wants the child as the ideal successor. That isn't always a possibility.
No.
And so informing ourselves about different options, and one of them that I'd love to highlight is the rise of employee ownership trusts that we're starting to see. And essentially, in brief, EOTs allow the business to be sold to a trust that holds the company on behalf of employees. And so instead of employees buying direct, like individual shares, the trust owns the company collectively and employees benefit from its profits and long-term stability. And why this is such a great option potentially for business owners is because founders have put their blood, sweat, and tears into building what is effectively another child.
Yeah.
And so they want a certain vision and they want to protect their employees and the community. And so this could be a really great alternative that we're now seeing to see more of in Canada.
I can certainly attest to the whole family-run business or the generational business. It's not as common as it used to be. I've traveled across the country interviewing small businesses for the Yes, We Were Open podcast, and I've met with smaller family-run businesses. And yeah, obviously the kids want to do their own thing. They don't not interested in running mom and dad's business anymore. So these trusts are interesting. So basically, the businesses become owned by the workers after the owners are gone.
Exactly. And so for some reason, this really was not popular or being talked about for many years in Canada. And recently, and I think in response to the recognition that this silver tsunami is happening sooner rather than later, what can we do in response or to help prevent so many of these businesses from just effectively closing? So this is a really interesting alternative that has seen widespread success in the UK and other parts of Europe. And so I'm excited about the potential that this could bring.
Who owns the trusts?
It depends. And so there are some companies that are being developed in order that essentially their company offers the service that they are the trustee. They own the trust on behalf of the employees, and the employees are the beneficiaries. There are other options through like financial planners and advisors. So there is variation in that.
And is there an option or an opportunity for somebody to buy the trust, like to purchase the business themselves?
Yes. And that's why it's important to seek that professional advice, because the idea of an EOT is really interesting, but the logistics of it are quite difficult. The bigger idea here is the goal is for continuity of the business and stewardship of that business. And so sometimes if you're just going with a fiduciary expert, they're just more so thinking about the finances and the legalities of it.
Right.
But what are the implications from a management and a stewardship perspective? So finding companies that offer that more holistic service that are going to help with the leadership transition as well is really key.
Yeah, they're not maybe invested in growing or innovating the business. So you're still looking for maybe an owner or a CEO or somebody to take leadership in that vein.
Exactly. It's a huge transition. And so while there are a lot of positives, making sure that there is also through that company that you're going through this process with, that there are people in place to help through that managerial transition. I'll also highlight here is that there are oftentimes with regards to family-owned businesses, there is that apprehension to professionalize. And as you mentioned, it might be that the next generation doesn't have an interest, or maybe they're just not ready yet. And so I would encourage those family business owners to remember that maybe in between, as you're preparing that next generation to have the skills necessary to take over, hire a non-family CEO. While you remain with the ownership from a family perspective, you're now leaning on non-family members for outside ownership. And that's okay too. And that could be a useful intermediary step.
Interesting. So you'd mentioned earlier some changes that happened to the capital gains tax in 2023. The more recent trade challenges that are happening can't help the situation either. So what's going on with that?
I'll give you a classic academic response, and that is, it depends. So the impact of current trade disputes between Canada and the US, what we're seeing is that it really does vary depending on the industry. And so for some business owners where they're doing a lot of exports south of the border, or they have close supply chain partnerships with cross-border counterparts, they're experiencing a lot of uncertainty, rising costs, difficulty to forecast for the future just because of the sheer uncertainty. But I also want to highlight that other businesses might not feel any difference at all. And we're actually seeing some local businesses see an uptick in revenue. And that's a lot of businesses in the tourism and hospitality sector. And we're seeing that as there's been this rise to travel domestically and to show our solidarity by buying Canadian. So there are also opportunities, I think, being had for certain businesses.
In your opinion, Dr. Burrows, is enough being done right now to curb this, or do we need to do more?
That's a tough question. I think things are just changing on almost a daily basis, it seems. And so while, yes, I think that from a holistic perspective, we need to be doing more to support our entrepreneurs, who I fundamentally believe are the backbone of our economy. I also understand from the other perspective, from the government perspective, that it's really hard to plan for something when there is such volatility in what is happening.
There's a move, obviously, by Canadian movement, elbows up to support our own, and a lot's being done in that capacity right now. Is it possible? Can you put on your prediction hat and say, in the foreseeable future, can you predict what's going to happen with the Canadian economy?
Ooh, no pressure there.
I won't hold you to it, but we know things are always changing, but it's always good to find out from experts like you.
Yeah, I do want to acknowledge the huge uncertainty that is facing small businesses in Canada. And that's not just from trade tensions. We're seeing rapidly evolving technologies like Gen AI, shifting economic conditions in our own country. And so I want to be honest about the uncertainty and recognize that entrepreneurs are probably feeling a lot of anxiety, and rightfully so. What I do want to highlight, though, is I find really inspiring to see how Canadians and entrepreneurs are showing up for one another during these difficult times. And what I do want to highlight is this idea of an entrepreneurial mindset. And at the heart of that is being open to change and being open to experimentation. And so rather than seeing these changes as deal breakers, I would encourage entrepreneurs to shift that mindset and see them as opportunities. So, for example, in face of these trade uncertainties, what does this mean for your ability to potentially diversify your supply chain or expand into new markets that you hadn't ever really considered because you didn't have to consider? And I think that openness to adaptation and that resiliency is really at the core to being an entrepreneur.
And again, in my travels with the other podcasts, I've seen a lot of this already with small businesses. And also as interprovincial trade barriers drop, there's more of those opportunities, right?
Most definitely. I was listening to the news this morning, and one of the financial experts were saying that this interprovincial trade has the opportunity to lead to like an increase of $250 billion to our economy. Yes, let's be doing things like that.
Yeah, because in the end, we'll end up stronger anyway by doing that work internally.
Exactly.
Dr. Burrows, this has been great. Thank you so much. If folks wanted to learn more or find resources on succession planning, where would they go?
Yeah, most definitely. Listeners can find me on LinkedIn or through the Smith School of Business website. For more general resources on succession planning, especially for family business support, definitely recommend checking out Family Enterprise Canada and the Family Firm Institute. And then for a more general resource, especially for professional support, highly recommend checking out the Business Development Bank of Canada.
I'll include links to all of those in the show notes below. Thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Burrows.
Thank you so much for having me, Al. It's been a pleasure.